So we are in a series on the Nicene Creed this fall. We're working our way through it line by line, and Ruth will be preaching for us this morning on the section that I will read now. On the third day, he rose again in fulfillment of the scriptures. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. His kingdom will have no end.
Heavy. Their feet drag, borne down by the burden of disappointment. The whole thing had been nothing but a failure. They had held such high hopes. Just days before, their master had entered the city triumphantly and been joyfully acclaimed as king. Finally, the Messiah was going to free his people from the Romans and establish his kingdom. And it had all ended in public shame, in the basest humiliation. That morning, the women had brought the cowed disciples some astounding news. They claimed some men at the grave had announced that their master was no longer dead. But who could believe women? They're so prone to fantasize. Dead. Jesus was dead. Their dreams had been dashed against the hard rocks of reality. How could they have been so misled? What was there left to do now? Leave Jerusalem and failure behind. Get away and hide in anonymity. Grateful that they were getting away unscathed. That was pretty risky business, getting involved in a radical movement that went against the grain of the powers that be, namely the chief priests and the Roman Empire itself. How had they dared question the authorities? They should go back to life as usual. No more dreams, no more risks. Now that hope itself had been buried, Cleophas and his wife plod along, wondering and wandering. As they talked, says Luke, and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. It was not uncommon for travelers to seek out companions for safety on bandit-infested roads. He asked them, "What are you discussing so intently as you walk along?" "Where has this stranger been over the last days? What could anyone be talking about but this? Rome's hand is always heavy, but crucifixions do not happen every day. Are you a visitor to Jerusalem and you do not know the things that have happened there in these days?" They blurted out in amazement. "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied, still baffled at his ignorance. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel." Still unable to recognize him, with heavy hearts, they now review the events for the stranger who has joined their plodding walk. But they're suddenly startled out of their account when their unknown traveling companion cuts in. "How foolish you are! How slow to believe all the prophets have spoken!" Their reaction is natural. How dare this stranger insult us? What does he know about us? Foolish, he called us. Slow, blind. And truly blinded they are. They are unable to recognize the risen Jesus because they are blindfolded by an ideology of power wrapped up in religiosity. Disregarding history and scripture, the religious establishment has defined Messiah according to the interests of the powerful classes in ways that leave untouched their connivance with the injustices of the Roman Empire and its lackeys. The ruling Pax Romana, the Roman peace, imposed by military and economic might, moved people at will in order to secure its borders. So ingrained in the disciples is this power paradigm that they have ears only for the official story. They remain deaf to the testimony of the women and blind to the presence of the risen Christ, just as they had been unable to grasp Jesus' repeated announcements of his coming death. Blinded by official story, they cannot recognize Jesus, nor acknowledge God's preferred mode of action. Luke continues, "Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter into glory?" the stranger continued. Suffering? What a strange concept. We were thinking of victory over our enemies, of the kingdom restored to the glory of King David's day, of finally proving to the world that we are the chosen people. But suffering? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all of the scriptures concerning himself. Jesus walked Cleophas and his wife through the history of the Jewish people, pointing out how time and again God works not out of power, but out of weakness. In the climax of God's restorative action, the grand liberator comes as a vulnerable stranger into an unwelcoming world. Read John 1:11. The son of a young country girl and a simple carpenter in the backwood province of Judea, far from the religious establishment of Jerusalem and further yet from the imperial seat in Rome, a fleeing refugee child, an itinerant teacher with no home to call his own, no social security or life insurance. Jesus lived the life of the poor. He walked the dusty roads and hung out with nobodies. He touched the untouchables and affirmed they too had a right to live. Not in the least a mismanaged plan or a failure of execution, the humiliation, the surrender, the piercing pain, the dark aloneness, in sum, the cross itself, was God's chosen mode of action all along. Emmaus is now just ahead. The conversation must wind down. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further, but although they still did not recognize him, they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." This invitation would not be uncommon. The roads were yet more dangerous at night. So he went in to stay with them. Now, customary and expected hospitality among Jews in those days included sharing bread no matter how late the hour. And good manners would involve offering an unbroken loaf to the guest. But yet another reversal occurs, with a sudden flashback to a previous meal in an upper room. Now, it's the couple who is hosting. This is their home. However, when he was at the table with them, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. The hosts are hosted. And only then, after opening their home to the utter stranger, they are converted. Instantly, their eyes were open and they recognize him. The blinders of tradition, misled expectation, and religious ideology are ripped from their dazed eyes, and they are now able to see the true Messiah. Bread broken and shared after a long day's walk. A body broken and given away for the sake of others. A son who holds nothing back, but submits in love to his Father's will, and so furthers God's restorative purposes in the world. Ah, Master! Thoughts and words, all a jumble with relief and excitement. We must call our neighbors. We must celebrate our reunion. We must... But Jesus disappeared from their sight. They have much to debrief. Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked to us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? Was not recognition stirring inside us, ready to burst forth and lighten our burden, Did we not hear echoes of our master's words as the stranger spoke to us? I have come not to be served, but to serve. The Son of Man must suffer many things and be killed. On the third day he will rise again. This is my body given to you. He told us, he taught us, and yet we did not understand. We truly were blinded. This had all transpired in their home, at their table, with their bread. As courteous hosts, they had generously welcomed the vulnerable stranger, sharing fellowship and food, but that act of kindness was not in itself transformational. Humility was required if they were to receive anything whatsoever from this overnight guest. Only when they divest themselves as their power as hosts, when they grant the outsider the opportunity to offer them something, does the veil drop from their eyes. They are then ready to enter into the story of God's good news. Nothing can hold them back now. Not nightfall, not bandits, not fear of judgment or persecution. The encounter with their crucified, risen, and living Lord is not something to sit around and theorize about, nor some mystical experience to relish privately. Meeting Christ is a profoundly missional experience. Communion with Jesus inevitably engages his followers in God's work in the world. Awareness of God's presence in our lives thrusts us into mutually welcoming relationships with others. So they get up and head at once to Jerusalem. They have to share the good news with the other disciples, even if it means returning to Jerusalem, the center of power that had no room for their Lord. Jerusalem, the city they had left behind in hopeless resignation. Their encounter with the risen Lord changed everything. They are now ready to be sent into the messy, broken, dangerous world as witnesses, seeking God's reign and God's justice. In conclusion, perhaps we, like the disciples, also need to walk away from our Jerusalems with their blinding pretensions of power and illusions of being a Christian nation. Perhaps we, like them, need to listen to the full biblical story so we can become more fully immersed in the action of the triune God from creation to recreation so that we might discern our place in our particular historical juncture. Perhaps we, like them, need to practice radical hospitality. I suspect that as long as our hearts, homes, and borders remain closed to those whom progress, not Jesus, has left behind, we will continue to be blinded to Christ's presence among us and to what it means to follow him. Perhaps only when we, the hosts, are hosted by the strangers in our midst and learn from people devoid of power what walking the way of Jesus means, only then will we truly, really meet the risen Lord and live out God's purposes. Perhaps then we, like them, will regain hope and be ready to return to our Jerusalems with a clear vocation, ready to live as the community of the servant king, whom we remember as we come in a moment to the table.